Welcome to the United Bias. I'm Kiran Chetty. On this week's show, I'm delighted to be joined by Slide and Karau. Hey, Slide, what's going on?
Hey, Kiran, how's it been? Yeah, all good, yeah?
Great. I'm also joined by Ruben Cronier. Hey, Ruben.
Hey, Karen, how's it going? Great week for those of us who are in denial about events of the past weekend.
Yes, that's exactly what we touch on in this week's show. We speak about the Champions League final and discuss, all things related to the game and the merits of the treble, with City being victorious.
Boo.
We'll also touch on West Ham and David Moyes winning the Europa League, Ruben.
Yeah, the Moyes showing us that we were wrong all along, and perhaps we should have hung on to the chosen one a little longer.
Perhaps we should have. And lastly, we end things off in the MLS with a Messi slide.
Yeah, is he going there to, rack up those dollars and stack up those bank accounts? Or what?
Or is it because of the sporting merits of the MLS? Stay tuned, listener, and find out on today's show. Manchester City 1, Inter 0. Manchester City win the Champions League final and with it complete their treble. Slide. Was the game everything you expected? Because clearly we had hopes and dreams, and Ruben in particular had hopes and dreams that Lukaku and the boys would do something beautiful against Inter, but that didn't transpire. How did things turn out in reality?
So first and foremost, I think Ruben's dream was a bit far-fetched, obviously, because Mkhitaryan didn't start. So already it was looking a bit gloomy for Ruben's dream to come true, So yeah, so on the game, I think it was a very, very closely contested match, albeit Inter having the better chances. Also, they took the game to City. It's just unfortunate that they just weren't able to convert on the chances that they actually had. I mean, Edison had to put in a couple of good saves at the end there, but it was a very, very tightly contested game, and I think I have to praise Inter, Onana in particular, the goalkeeper, at his skill in the sense of ball distribution, the ball at his feet. He could literally play in the midfield. He could play a 6 or an 8. That's how good he is with the ball at his feet, and he did such a good job. However, I literally about 30 minutes ago replayed the goal they conceded, and if I put that goal next to the one that David De Gea conceded in the FA Cup in the second goal, they are literally probably identical goals, where you would think or expect a save to come out of the goalkeeper in that particular instance. Yes, I mean, we can then try and sort of say, cool, there were 2 defenders in front of him and all the other stuff. But I have to raise this because of the amount of critique I gave David De Gea in the FA Cup final last week. So I think, that could have been an opportunity for an extra time. And then who knows, maybe Inter would have actually taken the game. But I think all in all, I think it was indeed a good game. Not too chuffed at the fact that City took it, for obvious reasons. But yeah, I think from a game perspective, yeah, very, very good game.
Oh, the Onana probably looks more comfortable on the ball than McFred do, to be honest, than the dynamic duo. So
I totally agree.
it's incredible. It's truly remarkable. And now I understand why he threw his toys out of the cot when his coach didn't want to allow him to play with his feet at the World Cup. I mean, he got sent home, right? His coach is like, no, you need to kick the ball. And he's like, no, I want to play, which is, you understand now what the man possesses. I think you're being a bit critical. I think you're being extremely critical. I think it's very difficult. I don't think it's the same at all. I think the body's in the way. I think he was unsighted because of that, because of the sea of bodies. And his 2 men standing in front of each other, it was just laughable, actually. Just a little bit of poor luck there. So the game starts, and as Slide points out, the big change that Inzaghi makes is he brings back Brozovic into the fray. I mean, the Brozovic has been one of the key performers over the last few years, but all of a sudden he's been out of the team. Mkhitaryan's been playing in this deeper role, weirdly enough. And suddenly for the final, Mkhitaryan goes to the bench. Brozovic comes in. I mean, it was a gambit that seemed to have worked for Inzaghi.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you sort of have a general look at how the game played, I mean, they certainly, I think, set out to box out City in midfield, and I think they did that to a large extent. I mean, we know Pep likes to deploy his sort of wider players, and today it was Silva and Grealish. And I mean, I think if you look back to the FA Cup final, De Bruyne probably, similar role to Bernardo Silva. This game, sort of tend to, want to pin back the back line of the opposition, get them spread wide, and then that opens up, the opportunities either for Haaland to drop down and get involved, or for a Stones or a Rodri to push up. So that's, Pep likes to do that. The way that he, with Brozovic in a ready packed midfield, managed to sort of keep Man City extremely quiet in the middle of the park there, so I think that was very effective. And, as we saw, the way City lined up at the back obviously was a little different from how they normally do. We saw Stones pushing up to a more advanced position, whereas normally he'd sit, obviously sort of as part of a back four. Today we saw sort of a different line. Well, not today, at least over the weekend, we saw a different lineup with the back three. I think definitely Inter made City think. I think made them perhaps get pushed a little bit outside of what their normal comfort zone would be. And, I think it sort of shows that, I mean, yes, as we expect, City held on to a little bit more of the possession. They're definitely passing it around a lot more than Inter were. But that said, it was sort of kept fairly at arm's length, I think. And sort of a lot of the City passing that City were doing was sort of pushed back, not in an advanced position necessarily. So I think they did really well. I think that tactical switch, as you've mentioned, Brozovic and Mkhitaryan sitting on the bench, did work out for a large part of the game. But ultimately, I think we did see in the goal, it kind of allowed that really was City doing what they do sometimes like to do, which is create the position where they can pass it out to sort of one of their sort of men who's stuck much wider, and we in the end see that kind of cut back in a sense, and a late push into the box from the mid. So Rodri putting the goal in. I mean, maybe a little bit lucky in Onana being probably unsighted and struggling to get that one, but it did look like a goal that's City may, that's kind of a goal there. If you saw one coming in, that's probably what it could have looked like, So in that sense, I don't think you can say, oh well, City got lucky to score. Maybe the particular way the goal went in was lucky, but on sort of balance of play, it was a fair one. That's not to say, I mean, obviously later on in the game, Inter pushing, but that's hard to it's hard to this team's needs a goal last few minutes of a Champions League final. Of course, they're always going to be pushing in, and then our man Lukaku didn't start as we suspected he might have, but comes on and really I think spurned two pretty good chances at the end, which was I guess we see why he's not sitting in the Premier League anymore.
Look, I feel two big points for Man City there. Stones playing that 8 role on Saturday was one of those strokes by Pep to say, okay, cool, let me just switch things up, because obviously these guys are going to be gesting that sort of midfield area. And you would see Stones well in that final third for most part of the game. And, some of the trickery that he was doing, running on off the ball and everything was actually quite impressive for someone who actually plays centre half for most of his career, actually for all of his career, And then I actually feel that De Bruyne's injury is what actually brought City into the game, because Inter hadn't planned on Foden playing in the middle there. They would have expected him to come out wide, and him causing all that madness and mayhem in the middle is essentially what sort of upset the apple cart, because the goal that actually City did concede, you see Foden making a run with the ball in the middle of the park, and then making a pass to, I think it was Akanji. Akanji then makes through pass through the 18, and then there's a cutback, and Rodri's coming in to just smash it. So you see that sort of initial build-up play from that random guy who came in, who normally plays out wide, who was now playing in the middle, essentially sort of changed the dynamics for City, thanks to De Bruyne being injured. I think it would have been a totally different story if De Bruyne had stayed on the park.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very valid point. I mean, Foden definitely pushed into more advanced positions than De Bruyne normally would, and I think that kind of exploited, just because of the back three that were lined up with, you probably find a little bit more space in the half gap there, sort of towards, in a more advanced role, which if De Bruyne wasn't exploiting, Foden does come in a little bit more movement and mobility. It actually does put a bit more pressure on the back three there of Inter. So, yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And ironic, because obviously we know De Bruyne is an absolute talisman for Man City, but just perhaps not the exact player they needed to unlock the game.
Yeah, and just on Stones, I mean, essentially, as you point out, Stones was in midfield last night, and when City had possession, often occupied, you'd call it the right wing. He was the one doing the overlapping and providing that support to the City midfield. So he was there, typically what you'd consider your right winger if you played with such a thing, or if you played with a right fullback. Those are the positions that he was taking up often in possession, which was really interesting. A shift from Pep, as we spoke about Pep maybe overthinking things and changing things up too much. But I guess the changes made sense because he was trying to combat, as you pointed out last week, Ruben, the two up front, which is something unusual that teams don't face every day.
Yeah.
So to combat that, he put the extra man in the middle of the park to negate Dzeko and Lautaro. And to be fair, I don't think Dzeko did anything while he was on the pitch. I don't think he offered any threat whatsoever.
Nope, zero.
So the plan worked. Tactically, it worked. However, with these changes, both teams their output seemed to be stifled, in particular Cities. And we were talking off before we started recording, and you made a good point, was that it was similar to the FA Cup final in that City's output was stifled once again in both games. Was not the normal marauding game plan, and that in large part is due to the opposition, and whether it's Ten Hag or in this case Inzaghi's plans to stifle City, which I think, when you're outgunned, is what you need to do, is to come up with ways to mitigate City's creativity, to stifle it. And I think they did that brilliantly. Overall, I felt that City perhaps, on the balance, have played as a pretty even game. And if anything, maybe Inter had slightly better chances. In fact, from an XG perspective, the expected goals model shows that Inter, expected to score just over 2 goals in the 90 minutes, with the City only at 1. So, sometimes you need a bit of the rub of the green, and it went City's way.
And interesting, I mean, to think about the fact that, Erling 52 goals, Haaland blanks in 2 finals in a row. I mean, they won them in the end, not in massively convincing fashion, but I mean, brings back this argument that people have had. I don't know, Slide, your view. Has he improved them or hasn't he?
So it just so happens that he actually set a record or broke a record, depending on what you want to actually look at. This is the first time Erling Haaland has gone 3 consecutive Champions League games without actually scoring a goal. He usually scores every other game, every third game at least. He hasn't, and this was the first time. Third game, blank. So I guess he was bound to break a record somehow, some way, or set one. But yeah, I just had this playback of the Dumfries opportunity in the first half for Inter. That, my gosh, I stood up from my seat and I was like, what the hell are you doing? It's like the Dumfries from the World Cup had just left. Because I swear, if that wasn't the World Cup, the Dumfries that was scoring every other goal for the Dutch, he would have actually done something a lot more creative with that opportunity that he got.
So last week we spoke about Inter invoking the spirit of 1999, but the sounds of it, Dumfries channeled the spirit of 2023 on Bissaka instead. We got the wrong United inspired change there, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, true that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, to be honest, I don't think anyone expected this sort of a result. I think most people thought that City were probably, were more than likely going to hammer Inter, because, once the goal goes in, the first goal goes in, Inter need to start chasing, and, lo and behold, they'll, open up, and as it happens, you chase a game and you sometimes get a bit of a hiding. So I think that seemed to be the consensus going around as a 3-0 or 4-0, the likely scorecard. But by and large, I think if you're in an Inter camp, you're pretty proud of your performance. You would have been deserved winners. You could hold your head up high. You did everything in your power. But for some luck and a little bit of variance, I mean, the shot where Lukaku inadvertently, the ball strikes Lukaku standing right in front of goal. I mean, that's, laughable. That's just sometimes that's just what happens, right? Like that's just one of those things. And it's not poor Lukaku's fault. That's not his fault. He's there, and it's just Sometimes the ball follows you, like in cricket, the ball follows you.
The one time you expect him to not make the touch, which he usually fails to make the touch, and then
Shame.
this time he actually pulled through.
It's crazy. Like Lukaku's become this figure of, this comical figure. Almost it just doesn't make sense given how talented he is, and again, his great goal scoring record. It doesn't make sense at all how he's become this joke, and everyone loves to have a little bit of a dig at poor Lukaku. But yeah, it would have been nice if he could have went his way.
I had a mate of mine saying that if I'm Megan the Stallion, I'm not picking up any calls after that stuff from Lukaku in the final. I was like, oh, was it that bad?
Listen, I'm sure he'll be all right. I'm sure old Big Lukaku's going to be all right. Maybe next year at Chelsea, who knows? Any other thoughts on the game itself? Was there anything unexpected or anything that maybe stood out to either one of you?
And I think because I've watched practically all of Man United's games throughout the season that's just gone by, I think Inter, and I probably watched a handful of Inter games. I think Inter literally channeled their inner Man United in the sense of not taking their opportunities. And that's essentially what it is. Yeah, so I think, it's like I was saying last week, if in a game like this, you win the game based on moments, and essentially that's what Man City did. If you get 2 chances, you must take them, because they're not going to come. You're not going to get 20 chances or 15 to try and sort of increase your sort of chances of actually scoring. And to me, that's the actual thing that stood out, where Inter didn't actually sort of take their chances. I mean, yes, Edison did pull a couple of crazy saves at the end there, but yeah, it's those moments that you're actually wanting to convert, and that's essentially for me what really it was more painful than anything.
Yeah, and fine margins. I mean, at the end of the day, football games and sport in general is often decided by fine margins, and sometimes rub off the green. You just need a little bit of luck to go your way, and this was City's moment, and with that, it completed the treble for them. From a sporting perspective, the way they've gone about this, the way they've put this together, has been hugely impressive. If you go back historically and you look at some of the other clubs that were taken over, I mean, even City in the beginning, if you remember, under the Thai ownership, they were just spending recklessly, buying all these weird players. Even in the early days of Joe and Benjani, and then Roque Santa Cruz, later Robinho. Yeah. There was just like reckless abandon. And it was like, well, we're just going to get these shiny toys and hope it works. And you've seen that over and over again, where a team gets taken over with someone with a bit of money, and they're quite passionate about it, and they just go nuts. This version of City under its current ownership wasn't anything but that. They were quite methodical in the way that they went about building the structure and the team. And I think we've spoken previously on the pod around planning and the lack of it. And even if you look at someone like, again, Manchester United, who've spent about the same amount of money as City over the last few years, but absence of a plan and doing so with a concrete plan behind you. And you can see it's evident. So from a sporting point of view, they've done a hell of a job and set the bar in terms of how to go about really trying to chase this ambition and this goal of being the best. I've said a lot there about how great City are in terms of as an organization, as a structure. Is there hope? Is this juggernaut just going to dominate for years to come? Or do we see any way of anyone else competing with them? Because I tell you what, if they carry on in this fashion, they've been nothing but sensible. How are other teams going to stop them?
I think what's really tough about the way City have done it is that it's not just 2 things. It's not just really smart management, and we talk analytics FC and Brighton, let's say, and how that lets them punch above their weight. It's not just throwing a lot of money at things like we've seen, with the Man United. It's poorly spent money. It's a very particular combination of a lot of money, but spent incredibly well. And it's not just, people think it's just Man City the club. It's not Man City the club. City Football Group owns 13 separate clubs. So not just Man City, it's New York City FC, Melbourne, Yokohama in Japan, which Postecoglou managed. Actually, we'll come to him. Clubs in Spain, Canada, South America, Palermo. It's an entire network. It's a skill and talent network that they can draw on, and honestly, it just puts them so far in advance of everything from backroom to player management to and it's quite brilliant, if you look at it in that way. So they've created a footballing machine where you've really got from the smallest cog in the City Football Group to the biggest, all feeding eventually into the crown jewel of the project, which is Man City. As I say, from a business perspective, from a how to take over and dominate football perspective, it's pretty much exactly the playbook. That's how you would have to do it. I struggle to see that on a very consistent basis you're going to have another club build up and be able to do it. It's not just if you think of a whole lot of Qatari money flying into a club like PSG, and you can recklessly spend, and you can spend your 250 millions on a Neymar, and you can make Mbappe your coach in all but name, and you can handle your business incredibly poorly, and if you've got bottomless pockets, sure, you'll win League One year in and year out. But as City have shown, okay, it took them 15 years, and we spoke last week about Pep's Champions League curse, but eventually, if you do things this methodically and this well planned, eventually it's going to pan out. I struggle to see it. It's one thing on the football pitch to compete, and obviously people will always be competitive and competing with them. It's not, I think, no club will ever win the Premier League ever again, but to establish a period of dominance like this, I think it's going to be very hard to break.
Although people said the same thing about Liverpool decades gone by. They said the same thing about United in the 90s. For a time in the 2000s, it looked as though Chelsea were going to be this unstoppable force, and we couldn't see how one would overcome it. So they're maybe not quite the same in terms of how those systems and those clubs were built and how the dominance was achieved with those clubs. But we've seen it. There's been precedents where clubs win a lot of titles in a row. It looks insurmountable. So I have no doubt that somehow, somewhere, it will change. And it could be as simple as Pep leaving. Because we've seen that before. Great manager leaves club, and you think, oh, it's going to be okay. We've got the players, we've got the recruit, you got recruiting, you've got money, you will be okay. And somehow it doesn't, right? We've seen it there. We've seen it with Arsenal. You've seen these great teams that take a fall from grace and for whatever reason really struggle. Arsenal, I think it's 19, 20 years now since they've won a Premier League for a great club like Arsenal. United's 10 years.
10 years on
United, yeah. So on the one hand, I'm kind of arguing against myself here, but you think that it will come around and hopefully something will change. Slide, Ruben spoke a lot about the sporting merits, and I think it's fair to speak about the sporting merits before we speak about anything else. And it's been part of our frustration, and we spoke, I think, the last pod about how poorly United were running. There are other clubs. Everton was the other example, mini United. Spending recklessly, no plan, putting square pegs in round holes consistently. And I was reminded today of David Moyes' era. We'll get into David Moyes a bit later. But if you recall, we had an aging squad, and our midfield was run, remember, by Carrick and Paul Scholes, playmaking Paul Scholes, who came out of retirement to win one more league title for us.
Yeah.
And Scholes retires again, and our midfield signing is Fellaini. And that just sums up how poorly run that club is. And City is anything but this. So if some of these clubs get their acts together and run them like good businesses would, where you do try and find the best people and put them in positions, and not just let's give it to Giggsy, or give the job to so and so because he's a club legend, or he's been around the book, he's been around the park with us. No, get the best in class people in these different positions, and you will see a shift in the way with different clubs approach things and levels of competitiveness. So, is there something that we can hold on to, we can look to say, maybe the City team is aging? I don't know. Is there some chink in the armor that you could see where possibly other teams have a chance of going at them and taking them on in years to come? Or are we going to see a period of a 5-year, 10-year period where City are going to end up winning the Champions League? 3, 4, 5 times.
I think they might win it again, probably in the next couple of years or whatever. But I do feel one of these Spanish clubs is going to be back to win it next. In the very near future. As much as I'd love for United to be the next sort of Champions League winner, I don't think we're there yet. Particularly because it doesn't look like we've got a plan. Look at how long it's taken us to sell our club, for starters. But anyway, so I think I'd be very worried if if we know who's going to come in for Bernardo Silva, for Gundogan, the guys who are allegedly leaving the club this season, because obviously those are two key personnel. If they get two top-notch players in, then I don't see how City cannot defend the Premier League in the next season, right? But however, in saying that, all it takes is for a Chelsea football club to just get their act together with that squad that they've got, particularly those sort of players that they signed in the last season, and those to come, in this new window coming. If they get their act together, they're only in one competition, obviously with the other sort of FA Cup and Carabao Cups coming in, but their only focus will be football once a week. If they get it right, they could challenge, and that's essentially something that would potentially hurt City. But again, it's about how the other teams come with a plan. Because if, let's say, United make our primary focus and goal for next season, screw the Champions League. Yes, we're in there. If we get knocked out at the round of 16, cool, no worries. But then our focus is the Premier League, and we just focus on those W's and those 3 points. We could actually take it. And we then use the squad players or fringe players to actually do the job elsewhere, in the other sort of...
Sorry, just to be clear. Sorry.
Yeah.
To be clear, take what?
The Premier League. That's what I'm saying. So if you focus, I'm saying it could be a plan or a strategy in and around this entire thing. It's the only way you're going to topple City. You focus, you...
What he's saying is City are going to be so distracted by winning the Champions League and the FA Cup back-to-back that they're going to be distracted from the Premier League. And we'll
look at how they started this season that they ended up winning. Obviously, they won because Arsenal pulled an Arsenal, right? If Arsenal had sort of stuck to their guns, no pun intended, they were actually going to take the Premier League this season, and we wouldn't be talking about a treble for City in any case right now. But again, all it takes is a team like an odd Leicester season, to come in and just do a madness. And we're talking other things. No treble, no Premier League for City or whatever it is. On paper, yes, definitely. It could be a City thing. But we'll see. We'll see how the season sort of unpacks next season. But in terms of a master plan for other clubs to sort of topple City based on the personnel that they've got, geez, I don't know. It's going to take a serious plan. And I speak personally from a Man United perspective, where it's, if we put a master plan together from recruitment to staffing to whatever, to personnel on the field and on and off the field, and we get our ducks in a row, maybe not this season, maybe not the following season, but maybe the season after that, we'll probably start seeing things actually come to fruition. And I'm literally fearful of what might become of Chelsea in this new season. Now that they've got someone decent, and I say decent in quotes, coming to sort of manage those players next season.
I mean, I think we've even spoken about Poch being appointed, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, they've got a lot of players, but they've also got a squad that's with no balance, no goal scorers. Some of the key midfielders leaving. I mean, is he? It's one of those weird things.
They got Lukaku returning.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we're getting distracted here, but I can agree with long-term plans and things changing, but in the short term, no. Let me just make this abundantly clear: no football team that has Aaron Wan-Bissaka starting at right back is going to win an elite trophy. Just not going to happen. It's just too limited, and we're rubbish. When you've got the likes of him and De Gea, who are at odds with what a manager wants to do, and this particular manager being Ten Hag, it is not going to happen. So unless we miraculously see a change in those key positions, and we get strikers, different story, right? It's just not going to happen. So I think you're being as much as I'd love to be optimistic, I can't see that being a reality anytime soon, unless the serious overhaul. And I think we're doing that next week. I think that's next week's show.
Yeah.
So maybe we can keep that for then. Just we've spoken about the sporting perspective and the City juggernaut, and I think we've been fair, especially a Manchester United leaning podcast. We've given them a lot of flowers, so to speak. But the reality is that all these funds and the way this has gone about, it just doesn't make sense. And they've been charged multiple times by UEFA and now the Premier League with this ongoing case. Ruben, should we view this treble accomplishment or the sporting accomplishments as a whole, is it diminished due to the fact that all these financial breaches that they've been accused of? And furthermore, I mean, if you just want to go at a granular sort of level, there was a if you guys follow us on social media, you'll see today we posted a link, and it's a Wolf of Wall Street, when it's that iconic scene where he's talking, Leonardo DiCaprio is talking, and he says, we were doing all these crazy things, and was it legal? Technically no, but we didn't really care, and it's just so funny, and that sums up City so well. That's kind of my feeling, and I feel like it diminishes things. Do I have sour grapes here, Ruben, or is there merit to sort of thinking that, this is not the way that things should work, and these guys have cheated the way of financially doped, as Mr. Wenger said all those years ago?
Makes me sick to the core.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because it does. I mean, inevitably, it's going to sound like sour grapes coming from the three of us in particular. I mean, I don't think, but that said, I like you say, Slide. It absolutely, more than any other sporting achievement, it's the Lance Armstrong seven Tour de France's of football. Yeah, it's it seems like a great achievement until you know a bit more about it, and then it kind of colors the thing to such an extent that it's really hard to take it seriously. And again, to not necessarily just sound like I'm a Man United fan who's crying over a great achievement by a rival. I mean, you just need to look at, of course, I hated every second of Liverpool finally winning the Premier League. I mean, I couldn't watch their final few games. It was absolutely traumatizing as a fan, but I can absolutely acknowledge that they did it, in the right way. I can't, there's no excuses we can make. There's no slipping or sliding away from it, or arguments that you can make to diminish what Liverpool did. Can't diminish their European record, as much as it pains me to say it. They've achieved what they have in the right way. And so, I think it's, by contrast, you look at how City have done it, and it just really, to me, it invalidates the kind of greatness of it. And I mean, I think it'll be an easier argument to make if they ever do actually get found, guilty of the quote unquote financial doping. I think that certainly lends a lot more credence to what we're saying now. Unfortunately, the investigation period obviously ends, and I think is 2017, 2019, somewhere around then. So it wouldn't obviously cover the last couple of seasons, but it definitely, I think this success now is built on those successes then. So certainly if we ever get that finding, I think it's a lot easier to make the argument. But that said, I think it's a fairly clear case of a tainted achievement that I think, even if it stays upheld and gets struck down like Lance Armstrong's trophies, I think it'll inevitably always pale compared to the very least the 99 treble that United pulled off.
Yeah, I think there's two different questions, right? One is the financial doping element of this. So if you want to say, well, okay, how has this money come through? Like, the best example for me is this Erling Haaland. How the hell does Erling Haaland cost like 50 million, whatever it is, around 50 million pounds, give or take? How does that happen? Are you telling me there's no one getting there's an envelope, brown envelope going somewhere along the lines? It doesn't make sense, right? Because you can have a release clause if you want, but you as the selling club can say, well, hang on, anyone else wanna beat this offer? You can have a release clause, and the next club can come in and go, here's another 30, 40, 50 million on top of that. And you can choose to sell to the next buyer, right? So it didn't make sense. There was no competition. They get this robot who might win the Ballon d'Or this year, and for a snip price. Where out here people are talking about, I don't know, 120, 130 million for Osimhen, and like all these absurd numbers for other good strikers in the world. So it just doesn't make sense. And obviously, part of the accusations for City were that they've created these shelf companies where they've been paying staff, players, managers, etc., so that they don't inflate they don't reflect the true numbers going through the club. So that they create these shell companies and they sort of give them the balance of their money. And this is part of the suspicion around Haaland, is that there's some monies being exchanged that are off the book, so to speak, which would make sense why you'd get this goal scoring machine at a snip.
Yeah, and definitely Alfie Inga Haaland's bank account grew by, I would guess, at least another 50 millions.
Yeah. So there's that element of, is this above board? Is there a level playing field, so to speak? And then the other element is, if you want to compare trebles, okay, fine. Let's compare trebles, because let's compare the strength of schedule, the opposition that Manchester United had to face versus City. And if you recall the FA Cup, I mean, I remember we had to beat Liverpool, Newcastle, and it was a decent Newcastle at the time. Newcastle, Liverpool, and Arsenal on a run to the trophy. I can't remember what order Liverpool and Newcastle were, but we had to beat both of them, which at the time, again, just to stress, Arsenal were a fantastic team, and they were ever so close to winning the league themselves that particular year and winning the double, right? Because we beat them in that semi-final. For me, the strength of schedule, Manchester United, a much tougher run. Today, England is this league with all the money, all the sponsors, where everyone wants to be. Back in the 90s, dear listener, the Serie A was the league. It was the preeminent league. All the best players in the world, all the Ballon d'Or winners typically were found in Serie A. This is, the Italian teams were just the best. And we had to face Juventus and Inter in that run to the Champions League in the semifinals and quarterfinals, respectively. And I'll remind you, pretty much every team had Ballon d'Or winners. It was ridiculous. You had Juventus had Zidane, amongst all the other great players that they had. I think Davids, Conte, Inzaghi. There were just Thuram. There were so many great players, just world-class players. Inter, just had Ronaldo. They just had Ronaldo. There was all the best players in the world, and then there was Ronaldo, who was God level. Ronaldo was basically, for younger listeners out there, was basically what Cristiano and Messi was, except he was man alone, as just like a super being. Think of everything that Haaland can do, but with more ability, with more technically brilliant, just beautiful feet. He was just, I don't know, just go watch some highlights of Ronaldo. Just, one-man wrecking crew. So, we had these teams, these super teams that we had to overcome. Bayern Munich in the group stage. Our group stage, just to remind you, back then it was more of a Champions League. It was limited. There were less teams. It wasn't the top 4, top 5, whatever the case, that get in from these leagues. We had Bayern Munich and Barcelona in our group stage. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous to overcome that and then beat Bayern Munich. So purely from a strength of schedule, I would argue that Manchester United had a much tougher run and much tougher competition, if you look at it holistically, compared to the City side, who, yes, of course, they beat Madrid, an aging Madrid side, by the way, who you'd argue is at an end of a cycle with Kroos, Modric, and Benzema all sort of lost legs, so to speak. So I think those are the two ways you can choose to look at it. And I think from either perspective, I think that Manchester United's treble probably holds more weight.
Yeah, look, I'm inclined to agree with you there, in as much as it does sound like some serious sour grapes. But it is these are all hardcore facts. From a business standpoint and sort of evasion standpoint, gotta admire what City are doing, in the way that they're doing it, right? But gosh, from a football perspective and ethics perspective, it's disgusting. It's one of those that, you know, I'm hoping that whatever the outcome is, it is announced very, very soon of the investigation. That way I don't get any grayer than I am now before we find out what the sanctions are and what the sort of punishment is if they are indeed found guilty of all those sort of charges and stuff. So yeah, City's dominance, taking it with a pinch of salt. I mean, 5 Premier Leagues in the last 6 seasons. That's insane. And to think that, you know, it could all be wiped away if an Armstrong scenario gets sort of if we get that kind of outcome, then, you know, that's essentially what's gonna happen. So it's one of the reasons why in my lifetime I want the sort of sanctions to be sort of an outcome and sanctions to be announced ASAP.
I think that's enough.
Yeah, it's enough on City, guys.
Enough treble talk.
Let's move on. Now, City as a whole.
Onto another successful endeavor. The Hammers, led by
Hey!
David Moyes,
David Moyes, finally.
wins.
The Moyes.
David Moyes is a football genius, it turns out, after all. He wins the Europa League with West Ham. Ruben, obviously great achievement for David Moyes and West Ham team. Just what does this mean for one of the non-elite teams in, you know, one of the, I guess, the big 6 or big 7, if you will, with Newcastle now, one of the teams that fall outside of that to win a trophy and a European trophy at that? I mean, that's some kind of achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, I mean, obviously a very special night for David Moyes, you know, and you know, I think to a certain extent he's almost eclipsed the fact that it's West Ham that have won the trophy. It's that it's David Moyes who won the trophy. You know, to think, you know, sort of all the derision he himself came in for after his Man United stint, and then a couple of with a reputation that was really, really good from his Everton days. Then everyone thought, okay, well, he's clearly been exposed at United, and it sort of didn't really, with his subsequent moves after that and in different leagues, you know, none of it's really panned out incredibly well. So I think to turn around and sort of, you know, be able to flip this back on all of his critics is probably, you know, I mean, it's definitely the greatest night of his life, I'm sure. Looking at West Ham having achieved it, I mean, they did not have a great Premier League season. I mean, they certainly were in the running for relegation, and we could have had the quite incredible scenario of a relegated team winning a European trophy. And I mean, that would have, you know, I mean, I think the last thing like that sticks out to my mind is a centre called Portsmouth being relegated the year they won the FA Cup. You know, so you know, if you had to go back and ask a West Ham fan, what does this mean? I mean, I think they would certainly take the first trophy in 58 years and a European trophy at that over, you know, pretty much any league finish, barring maybe first or something like that, you know. So I think it's really important, and I think this is part of what is nice about the Europa Conference League is that it does give another outlet. It sort of gives a route for people to create achievements that didn't exist previously. And, you know, I think it was certainly a huge flub by Spurs, you know, I mean, when this trophy first got created, and you know, they could have actually finally got some silverware where Harry Kane could have put something in that dusty trophy cupboard of his if they'd actually decided to put some effort into it, you know, and they just didn't, you know, which just seems a bizarre call. And I think as we have seen pan out for West Ham, this is, you know, when we look back in the history books, West Ham, European trophy, you know, I think it's a pretty big deal. And
a West Ham fan right now would say West Ham's the best club in London. They're the most successful club in London this season. That's what they'd say. And to add to that, David Moyes is the most successful manager in London this season.
I mean, what would Arsenal fans say? Would they take 17th in the Conference League or whatever the finish was?
I think their trophy cabinet is a bit dusty. It's got spiderweb, so I think they'll probably take the trophy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, I mean, I guess you could say that, I mean, a league position generally obviously is a better indicator of the health of your squad and where you are at as a team, but that's not what we think about in 5, 10, 15 years, is it?
No. So are they going to say, okay, 22, 23, we were 5 points behind City?
We put the pressure on City, yeah.
So West Ham are massive. That's our conclusion.
That is it. They've done well. So from my side, I think hats off to David Moyes and the boys, Bowen and Rice baby, for that win, European trophy. I think it's one of those that, it's, you want something at the end of having such a rubbish season. This will just give you that sort of lift. I'm pretty sure next season the boys are going to come back and they're going to go back to where they normally play, middle top 10 of the table, based off of that massive win of that Conference League. So it's I think it was a necessary thing to sort of attain, and congratulations to them. And interesting fact that it's 3 Italian clubs that got smashed in the 3 European finals.
I mean, it's interesting also because it suggests that Italian clubs are on a little bit of a resurgence. I mean, I think we all thought the Italian league was going the way of a farmers league. At least that's kind of how I felt. But yeah, I mean, to sort of get 3 teams through, of course, a bit sad for them to not actually snag a single one of them.
I mean, and it's two out of the 3 European trophies have gone to English clubs.
One of them under very dubious circumstances.
We're not gonna mention the name again. I'm done with that freaking name.
Just interesting fact. I'm not sure if you guys heard this. West Ham actually won more games in Europe than they did in the league. So in the 38-game league season, they won less games than they did in the European journey. I think it was 13 versus 12.
Wow.
Believe it or not. So, yeah, incredible run by West Ham. But that being said, this is what really, given the resources and the disparity in income, this is what you should see. You should see English teams dominating Europe. It should happen, but it hasn't been happening over the last. It hasn't been happening. Yes, we had a period where, I guess 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where the Chelsea and United were doing quite well and were always there and thereabouts in the end of the Champions League, and odd time Liverpool, whatever. So there was that period. But by and large, somehow things have balanced out, and you haven't seen this domination by the English league that I guess you'd fear or you'd expect. So, if you looked at the West Ham team, with the amount of money that they've spent, and they had, Paquetá was playing for West Ham and Declan Rice, 2 highly sought after, talented players, and West Ham played dire, pragmatic football, and you could argue that it's winning cup football that they played, but they didn't. And with the talent at their disposal, I think they had a far better team than Fiorentina. And you didn't see it. You didn't see that evidently on the pitch. It was quite dour, sort of drab performance, and with moments, with little bursts here and there.
Fiorentina had like 75% possession in the first half. I mean, can you fathom that?
You can if it's, I don't know, if it's Man City versus, someone like, if there's a real disparity between the two teams. You could kind of see that, but not the other way around, where you've got the team with Rice, who's a supposedly £100 million midfielder, and Paquetá as well, who's the starts more often than not for the Brazilian national team in your midfield, and yet you don't have the ball. You don't, and maybe it's just something speaking about pragmatism and winning trophies and winning cup competitions, and this is something akin to Jose was the master of this in years gone by. But it always does feel strange when the team with the resources
is playing like the underdog, which is actually often what United felt like this season, playing as the underdog against teams that they really shouldn't have felt like.
Would you ever sort of think that you would say that in a sentence, that Man United were the underdog in this day and age, or in your lifetime, given when you started supporting Man United?
I don't know. I always think Manchester United is going to win, no matter how bad we are. I was going to win. So I don't know what you're talking about.
That's exactly right.
I don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, I think all in all, great showing by Moyes and his lads. And again, for someone, as you say, who's made this miraculous sort of turnaround. And if you recall, in the season, there was talk of him, shadow of him getting fired during the season because West Ham were doing so poorly. So he got back, the board backed him, and West Ham fans are benefiting from that today.
Are you saying that if Man United... No, never mind.
You know what? Unfortunately for that theory to hold through...
I hear there's an up-and-coming manager, David Moyes.
Yeah.
Managing West.
Yeah, maybe this youngster could do some good work at Old Trafford. We should try him sometime. On to other things. The other shocking news that happened, I think, just after we published our last episode, so it's worth talking. Lionel Messi signed for Inter Miami out of nowhere, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I think there was some chatter about it, but I always thought it was just nonsense internet speak of Messi going to the MLS because he's still quite young. He's still pretty good. Slide. This is earth-shattering news. This is a game changer, isn't it? Messi in the MLS.
Honestly, thought he was going back to Barcelona, and I think his heart is in Barcelona. And then for this news to break that he's going to MLS, I quickly had to sort of look and sort of check. Okay, who's this guy going to be playing with? All right, and this team that he's signed for is last on the league in the MLS. And it's not something that you'd expect from a player of Messi's caliber to join a team that is bottom of the log. You know, it was a shocker. But I guess there's probably promises that have been made. If any of the other transfers to Inter Miami are anything to go by, that you know what, he may actually rekindle some relationships with some of his former Barcelona players. Your Busquets, Suarez. I know Suarez has said he's outright he's not going, but you know these players always say these kind of things. But it probably is one of the major reasons that he actually did end up signing, outside of financial reasons, of course. But yeah, it was a shock to me. I actually did not expect to hear out of all the news that broke last week. This is probably one of the biggest ones that I'm like, okay, everyone's going to Saudi. Why are you going to MLS? You know what I'm saying? So it's yeah, it was one of those shocking ones. Eh?
Well, he did an interview, I think, after that, and he said that wasn't just because of money. You know, if he wanted money, he'd go to Saudi Arabia because apparently Saudi Arabia offered an absurd amount of money to him, somewhere in the region of like 1.5 billion over 3 seasons, believe it or not. Which, yeah, I'm sure he's getting really well compensated. And there's talks about profit shares from clothing manufacturers and shares of their model is Apple. It's on Apple. It's a paid subscription to the league, so shares of that as well. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be really well compensated. What does this mean for MLS? Is this any different to when Beckham went there all those years ago, or Zlatan, or Rooney, or any of these other big names historically, Ruben?
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing we can't deny, I mean, about football in the US is I think it's definitely grabbed the public attention a lot more in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know, something like that than it has before. You know, I mean, there was, slightly unrelated, but there was, I was watching this show about the golden auctioneers, and they have started selling football merchandise for crazy sums, well into the millions of dollars now for shirts from players like Messi that maybe before would have gone for a fraction of that. So there's certainly this public consciousness that now exists that perhaps didn't in times gone by. So I do think little by little it is gaining more traction, but that's it. I mean, there was a lot of fanfare when Beckham joined. I think probably more so even now than Messi joining. That was the absolute talk of the town, and dating a Spice Girl, and the utter losing of the minds that happened. Yeah, it was quite a thing. So I think these things do go in waves slightly. I think a little while ago we were talking about sort of when the Chinese league was picking up and offering players. Okay, maybe not 1.5 billion over 3 years, but they were certainly offering players 2, 3, 4 times what they could be earning, for sort of playing for similar clubs in Europe. Let's even think of Odion Igalo. We picked him up from playing in China, and obviously he was going to come for to the chance to play for his boyhood club, but we maybe thought a lot of big names are going to go there for the money. And what it's really ended up being is that these kind of mid-level journeyman players have kind of gone there to make a bigger payday than they could have otherwise had. So as I say, yes, of course, there's a slightly higher level of globalism than there was before in football, but I don't see it as some kind of existential change in Europe still being the kind of destination seriousness, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point in comparison to China and even in Russia before that. If you recall, all those years back with Samuel Eto'o, and the like, all flocking to Russia for the riches that were on offer. But typically, with China as well, it was typically older players, like we're seeing in Saudi Arabia, and I guess with the Messi move now to the US, guys who've accomplished a lot and had great careers. Kante's and Benzema's, and now Messi, Ronaldo. All these guys their best years are well behind them. So is this, I guess the question is, is this more of a retirement age, a retirement home, an old age home that's happening in these leagues? Because that's what typically MLS has typically done. It's got aging stars, and this seems to be a step in the same direction. And obviously, it's big news because it's the best player in the world, or who's been the best player in the world for a while. But typically, outside, I think of Oscar. If you think back to the Chinese league, that was the earth-shattering one. Do you remember when Oscar signed from Chelsea? Because this was a really good player in his prime, and he signed and went to China. Believe it or not, he's still there. Until we see that, if we start seeing that in the MLS or Saudi Arabia, I don't think our opinion should change. It's probably just going to be sort of vanity project / old age home in those particular countries. Slide.
Yeah, I think there's a masterstroke in this move by the MLS, or shall I say Inter Miami, to buy Lionel Messi. What is 35, turning 36, I think, this year. So he's not in his prime anymore, obviously. So retirement home, probably. I was reading somewhere that this is all part of the bigger plan for the US's bid for the World Cup, and needing Messi to sort of drive and become some form of an ambassador of sorts, or whatever you want to call it, and sort of up the numbers in terms of viewership, TV rights, and all the other stuff that comes with some of these bids for the World Cup and stuff like that. So it's probably that part of the deal that probably made it sweeter for him. Obviously, with him having won the World Cup, this year, makes it even better for him to be that guy. And again, on the other side, with the Saudis doing the same thing, getting all these big name players, they also wanting to sort of do a joint bid as well for another World Cup that's coming through. So it's probably part of the bigger plan, with some of these moves that we're seeing, and all these big spending, big name players. That's sort of happening. But yeah, let's hope that it does. But I don't see myself waking up to watch an MLS game, to be honest. But it's one of those. You were in the States recently. Now, Kiran, how did you actually go to any of the other games?
No, I didn't have a chance for that. I mean, the thing is, the US is like the land of immigration, right? Like that's number one. So the rest of the world loves football, and even if, leave alone the fact that they're developing it in their own society, if you're bringing in all these immigrants from all these other corners of the world, they're bringing their love and passion for football, and you're seeing it for cricket as well. Actually, with all the Asian immigrants who work in tech and whatever else in India as well. And you're seeing the starting of cricket leagues and whatnot as well there. So it's definitely there. It's evident. And you see the football shirts. And I think I sent a message a while ago. I was at this conference last weekend, a convention, and I saw a number of Manchester United shirts, actually. That is like the most common football shirt that I saw, was Manchester United at this conference that I was at, this convention that I was at. So the following's there, and it's going to continue to increase. But in terms of competitiveness and where that league lies, it's not, you're not going there because it's the best product. You're going there because, I don't know, it's entertaining, the stadiums are full, you'll watch it, it's a good domestic league. But let's put it this way, Lionel Messi's not going there to because he wants to face AC Miami. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not because of the rivalries or whatever that he's going there. I think.
I mean, it also feels a bit like an admission from these guys that their days or chances at winning, like a Ballon d'Or, for example, are over. I think for Ronaldo, it was Cristiano Ronaldo now, at least. I mean, he really only made that Saudi move when I think it was fairly clear that he was washed. That second of his comeback seasons at United, he clearly was off the pace. I think as these things happen, age-related drop-offs can happen surprisingly quickly. We saw it for Rooney at age like 30, for Ronaldo at age 37, but it was suddenly off a cliff, and that's kind of, it's only then that really his move got prompted.
Yeah, and I think it's quite similar. Although that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if Messi gets the Ballon d'Or, because they love to give people a Ballon d'Or when you're the star player for a World Cup winning team. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets it again, which will be a little bit of a farce as he's going to the old age home in America. But it's going to be interesting to see. It's rather unfortunate that Phil Neville was recently fired, because it would have been really funny to see Phil Neville be the manager of Lionel Messi. I would have loved that. Phil Neville teaching him how to do the step overs, the famous Phil Neville step overs. So that would have been fantastic. Guys, I think we've that's enough on Mr. Messi and his adventures, and it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds, and if more big names are going to follow. This is just an exception to the US, and more interestingly, Saudi, which seems to be the real league that seems to be chasing players quite aggressively. Apparently, I heard talk of Zaha being offered some monster money as well, and that's someone a little younger. I think he's 29, 30, if I'm not mistaken. So someone a bit younger being offered sizable amounts of money to go and play in the Saudi league. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. I think that's it for this week. Thanks for stopping by, dear listener. And if we could ask, if you enjoy our content, please give us a follow on the respective podcast apps, and a 5-star review, if you would be so kind, would be appreciated. We also happen to be on social media at The United Bias on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, you name it. The United Bias. Please would you give us a follow or a like? We'd really appreciate it.